This is my BMW K75. It's a 1987 model, so it's roughly 33 years old. Today I'm going to fit a front and rear motorcycle camera on it. I've been bought this as a present. It was about £28. It's made in China, and I'm not really sure how good this is going to be. In the box is the digital screen, which it tells you is not waterproof and you should hide away under the seat, which is a bit bizarre because they then give you a mount so that you can see it when you're operating it. There are two long looms with the cameras in. The square one goes to the back and the round one goes to the front, and then there's a loom for a power source, and this also says on here power box not waterproof, so that has to be hidden away. Also with it are the instructions, which are actually in Chinese and English. The first thing you learn is that these instructions are not for this camera. They talk about a controller that it doesn't have. They also talk about setting this up using a USB, but there are no USB connections. So I'm just going to wire it up and put it across a battery to see that it fires up. They've been extremely generous with the cabling. I've measured those at 2.5 meters long each, but there is a break there, so you could have one nearer the camera at either end. I've put the power across an old car battery that only holds about 10 volts, and that lit up straight away, and you can see that there's a readout on there, and if I move the cameras you can see that there's a large image and a quarter image, so I'm assuming that the larger one is the one for looking forwards and the smaller one is the one for looking backwards. It seems to me we could use this as a rear view camera and have the larger one to the rear, and watch that. It is actually remarkably clear and good quality. I'm quite impressed by that part of it. Here are the two cameras looking at themselves. I need to find an auxiliary power source so that the power is only on when I put the ignition on. My bike spends most of its life in a tin shed. It doesn't need to be monitored as an alarm system, and I don't want it on all the time, so I'm not going to connect it directly to the battery. There's two auxiliaries in the fuse box under the tank, so I'm going to have a look at those. The fuse box is under the tank. To avoid having to disconnect the tank completely, I've just put a piece of wood in there to raise it up, and then you can take the lid off and look inside, and you'll see that there's an auxiliary there. All browns are earth, by the way, so that's an earth. There's an auxiliary there. I don't actually know what that's for, and there's an auxiliary there. So there are two sources of power that I can tap into. So using this connection, if I put the black one into the brown, which is earth, and the red one into the red and white one, that's a permanently live connection. So I'm going to try putting it into one of the others so that this is not on all the time. So if I turn on the ignition so that the power is on, and I connect it across either of those green ones, that gives me a supply that is only turned on when the ignition is turned on, which is perfect. That's what I'm after. I want to have this set up so that I can actually see it working, and the only place I can figure out that it can go is there, and that means that the wires with these connectors will then be under the tank and out of the way. It would have been much better if they'd have made these wires so much longer so that the connectors were back here somewhere. The rest of it can be dressed into that box back there. But I need to figure out how am I going to fix that there without it being rattled to death. After loads of deliberation, I've worked out that there is no way that I can have that where I can see it. So I'm actually going to secrete it under the seat. Now, in order to set it up, I've moved the cameras around, and I've decided that the best place to mount them is actually here on the underside of the indicator. So I've got one at the front and one at the back. There's little sticky pads for putting these on. They're one shot. If you do it wrong, you've ruined it. So set it all up beforehand and make sure it looks like it should. These brackets are quite flexible, so you can bend them once they're in place. This one's ready to go on. I just need to peel the white bit off, and I very carefully and assiduously cleaned the underside with white spirit so that it will stick to it. And I'm just going to put it here. Okay, what I did was I squared it up with a headlight, so I'm looking across, bringing it out to about there, and there we go, and then that's that stack on. I'll check that it's pointing in the right direction. That image is at right angles. Ah, that's interesting. Okay, panic over, because the lenses do actually rotate, so you can rotate the image. I've now got all this excess cable left, which I'm going to try and dress into a nice careful bundle and put it down into the fuse box. I've managed to get that whole loom into here, and by bringing it into this corner I can just click the top down without having to cut any holes in anything. I'm trying to avoid making holes anywhere on the bike, because this thing is only going to last 6 months and I'll have to take it off again. But yeah, that's reasonable, and what I need to do now is make this so that it can't rattle about and get damaged, and also make sure that the seat lock still works and everything else still goes back in place. It's all set up now. To protect it while it's under the seat, I've wrapped it in a bubble wrap bag, which means I can easily get at it to take the SD card out so that I can then transfer that onto the computer. I've put this tank cover back on, I'm going to put the seat cover back on, and hopefully that won't crush it. Well, that seems to have gone back on. Let's hope it hasn't squished it. Went back on easily enough. And I'll have to give it a test ride and see what results we get from the cameras.